Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the long-awaited announcement on extra funding for the NHS comes today, as Theresa May says it will get the 70th birthday present from the government many have been expecting. Earlier on the Andrew Marr show, the Prime Minister explained that our departure from the EU would be freeing up some of the extra money.
Some people may remember seeing a figure on the side of a bus a while back of 350 million a week
yeah.
In cash. Well, I can tell you that what I'm announcing will mean that in 2023-24 there will be about £600 million a week in cash, more in cash, going into the NHS.
Well, listening to that is the Shadow Health Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth, who joins me now from Leicester. Good morning. Thank you for coming in.
Good morning.
This is good news for the NHS. You must be very happy about this announcement.
Well, I've certainly been calling for more money for the NHS since I became the Shadow Health Secretary, but it's simply not enough. I mean, they're the words of the Health Foundation this morning. When you've got the NHS waiting lists at 4 million and rising, when we've lost 16,000 beds in the NHS over 8 years, when we've got social care devastated after years of multi-billion-pound cuts, when you've got cancer patients waiting months and months for treatment, and in some cases even a year for treatment, the NHS and the social care sector needed significantly more investment than what has been announced today.
But hang on, how can you possibly say this is not enough?
Because it's not enough. Every health expert would say that.
But she's offering an average of 3.4% increase on the NHS spending. You went into the last election just a year ago offering 2% in real terms. So how can you say that this significant increase on your offer is not enough money?
Okay, quite straightforwardly. At the last election, we offered significant upfront investment in the NHS and, crucially, social care of around nearly 9 billion more in the first year. That's around 5%. The Tories had a different set of spending plans last year. They've now come forward with new spending plans. So we'll match that. We'll inherit this baseline, if you like, but we're saying we'll go further. So the taxation changes that we are proposing for the wealthiest in society and corporation tax, we're still committed to. So actually we'll be putting more money into the NHS than the Tories because we now accept these new spending projections that the Tories have come forward with, but we'll go forward, or we maintain our taxation changes, which means we can put more into the NHS, more into staffing, and there's nothing on staffing today.
How much more would you be offering the NHS than the Tories are at the moment?
And more into social care. Well, at the moment, we'll be offering around 7 billion more for the NHS
What's
in
that
our first year.
What's that as a percentage increase compared to the 3.4%?
And a billion extra for social care. So obviously, if the NHS budget rises by around 3.4%, which is unremarkable by historical terms, it's less than half what it got under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, by the way. So the idea that this is some great bonanza for the NHS, by historical terms, is absolutely not the case whatsoever.
But just so that people can be clear and can compare the offers, the government are saying an average of a 3.4% increase. What are Labour offering?
Well, we are saying we'll match what they are offering, we will inherit these spending plans, and then we'll come forward with more on top of that.
How much
the
more?
Exact percentages will have to be the exact percentages will have to be worked out when the Chancellor actually presents to Parliament what these figures actually are, because we haven't actually had the detailed breakdown year by year yet from the government. We've just had Theresa May going on the Andrew Marr show saying that she can do this by a Brexit dividend, when we know what she's really talking about is increasing borrowing and increasing taxation. She's just not honest enough to level with the British people on that front. So, but when the Chancellor and the Treasury present their budget costings, we'll be able to tell you the exact percentages. But what I'm telling you today, that we will match this, we will inherit these spending baselines, but we are prepared to go further for the NHS and for social care.
But you can't do that and maintain your promise that you will increase taxes only for the wealthiest 5%, because on your plans that would raise about £4.5 billion a year. The Prime Minister's talking about putting £20 billion a year into the NHS.
No, we can't, because these are the new spending projections for the NHS going forward. So yes, if the government collapses in the next year or so,
what you would raise from the tax rises you've promised wouldn't cover this.
But they would be in addition to this. The government are going to announce either next week in Parliament or presumably at the budget in November, how they're going to fund this. They're going to have to be upfront about the borrowing and taxation changes. We're saying we accept the NHS baseline that they are proposing. We're matching that. We're not going to go into an election and say we're not going to accept the projections for NHS spending for the next 5 years.
But you'll accept whatever tax increases they introduce in order to pay for it. Is that what you're saying? If they increase the basic rate of income tax, for instance, to pay for this, you will accept that despite having promised that you won't increase taxes for most people?
We will hold them to account. They have said they are going to fund this. Now, the speculation is that they're going to freeze the thresholds for higher income, for higher earners. But we'll have to wait and see, won't we? We don't know what they're proposing yet. But we're saying that we will accept the baseline, the new spending projections for the NHS that they are offering, because if we form a government, these are the ones that we would inherit. If the Tories collapse in the next 6 months, a year, and there's a general election, this is the spending we will inherit. But we are saying that on top of that, we are still doing our tax changes, taxing the wealthiest, the top 5% in society, increasing corporation tax, and from that we'll put more into the NHS, but not just the NHS, into social care, into prevention budgets in the country, into capital budgets, because we've got a £5 billion
but if in order to do that
in the NHS.
If to do that, you may have to break your promise in your last manifesto, which was you wouldn't raise taxes for 95% of people in this country. You will break that promise if you have to in order to fund the NHS.
No, I'm not saying that. We don't know what the government are proposing yet on their taxation changes. I mean, Theresa May is trying to pretend she can fund the NHS from some Brexit dividend. Nobody accepts that's credible.
So where are you going to fund it from? That's my question. Do you accept that taxes will have to rise for more people?
No, it's the government who've made this announcement today. It's for them to say what taxation changes they're going to bring forward. What we're saying that if we form a government in the next year, because this government collapses, that these are the spending plans for the NHS we will inherit, and we will match them. But we will go further with our taxation changes on the higher rate of income tax and corporation tax, so we can fund the NHS properly for the future, get waiting times down, not have it at a standstill like it will be under this plan, deal with social care, which has been utterly neglected under this plan, and put the money into the staffing and the training, so we've got the staff that we need for the future in our NHS as well.
All right, well, Jonathan Ashworth, thank you for speaking to us. We'll clearly need to wait to find out Labour's funding plans for this, but joining me now is Paul Johnson from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who can help unpack some of these figures for us this morning. Let's go back first to the government's announcement of an average of a 3.4% increase for NHS spending. Is that enough?
Well, it's the sort of number you might expect given the constraints that they're working under. 3.4% is a bit less than the average increase the NHS has had over its history. It's a lot more than it's got over the last 8 years. But of course, they're in a world where the economy's not doing terribly well. They've still got a significant deficit. The debt's very big. There's going to have been a big row between the Treasury and the Department of Health. So it's the kind of compromise you might have expected.
But we've heard the King's Fund, the Health Foundation, the Nuffield Trust, all sorts of health charities and experts tell us it needed to be at least 4%, 5% to make a meaningful difference.
Well, it depends what you mean by a meaningful difference. This will probably be enough to stop it going backwards. It's not going to be enough to make big improvements. I mean, that's the sort of pressures the NHS is facing. There are 2 million more people over the age of 65 in 2020 than in 2010. So even significant increases are needed just to keep the thing going. So we've had the 8 tightest years in the NHS's history. Following the 10 most generous years, we'll now have 4 or 5 years of just about average increases. So, you know, this isn't going to transform the NHS, but it should stop, hopefully, in a couple of years' time, yet another winter crisis.
So the Prime Minister wasn't absolutely clear on where the money would come from. She hinted there would be extra taxes. It's not clear whether borrowing would be required, but she was very clear that some of the money will come from what she called the Brexit dividend. Is there a Brexit dividend?
There isn't a Brexit dividend. So there isn't a dividend in 2 senses. I mean, first, over this period, if you look at the arrangement we've come to with the European Union in terms of paying our exit bill, and you add to that the commitments the government's already made to keep funding farmers and so on, there is literally arithmetically no money. And in addition, we know, because the government's accepted this, that the public finances will be worse as a result of the Brexit vote. The OBR has said by 15 billion a year. It could be a bit more, it could be a bit less because
I mean,
the
it is
economy
true,
will do
though,
less
and this is
well.
what a lot of people will be thinking. We pay a subscription fee, so to speak, to the European Union.
The point is, over this period, we're still going to be paying.
Yes, up until the end of the implementation period. But after that, we will stop paying our subs. That's got to save us millions of pounds.
Eventually we will, but actually not over this period, because the divorce bill, as it were, will continue to be paid through 2022 and 2023, which is the period over which this announcement has been made. So actually, as a pure sort of arithmetic point of view, over this period, there's no money. If you look further down the road, yes, we'll stop paying money to the European Union, but the economy has already shrunk a bit as a result of the vote. The government has accepted that actually the public finances will be 15 billion or so worse off, not better off. So there really just isn't money there from a Brexit dividend. Now that's not...
So we're talking about significant tax increases?
Well, in the short run, the government has a choice. It can borrow more or it can tax more. It could cut other spending more, but I think that's not going to happen. I mean, the scale of cuts elsewhere has been so significant. So it can borrow more or tax more. Borrowing more would break its manifesto commitment, but then, of course, every other fiscal rule for the last forever has been broken, so maybe this will be broken. In the long run, it must require higher taxes, because this is, the thing about the NHS is it's going to continue to ask for more money. If we want it to provide what we've come to expect and more, then we will have to pay for it.
Significant tax increase? I mean, people are talking about freezing the thresholds for when you start paying higher rate taxes. Would that do it, or are we actually looking at putting the headline rates of tax up?
Freezing the thresholds for higher rate taxes raises you a tiny amount relative to this. If you wanted to cover the whole 20 billion, then you would need, a couple of p, or more than a couple of p, on income tax, an increase in national insurance,
Okay.
Significant rises because 20 billion is a big number.
Yeah, all right. Paul Johnson, thank you very much for that. And I'll turn to my panel and ask you first, Lucy, is putting money on the headline rates of tax, a couple of pence, as Paul suggested there, is that going to be acceptable? Are the public prepared to pay more for the NHS?
Well, the proof of the pudding may be in the eating. I mean, the polling shows that around 90% of Brits, when asked, say that they're willing to pay more tax to boost health funding. But when it comes to it, let's see, we're already approaching a 50-year high in the tax burden in the UK. And of course, this announcement today has opened, a can of worms. There's going to be many more departments now calling for money. Sajid Javid wants more money for the police. Gavin Williamson wants more money for defence. With a febrile atmosphere in the Conservative Party, a lot of cabinet ministers with their eyes on the potential Tory leadership, I think there's going to be a huge row about funding all over the shop now.
And Steve, 3.4% increase. I mean, it sounds big in the headline figures, 20 billion a year. As Paul Johnson was explaining, many other people will come in and say, well, this isn't really going to massively improve the NHS, it'll just stop it getting worse. Is it going to be a big political win, or is it just a standstill?
It's the least they had to do to avoid the NHS lapsing into a crisis of proportions that wouldn't have been able to be sort of coped with. So in that sense, it was necessary. It's not enough, but I think they will find, if they link the tax rise explicitly to spending on the NHS, it will be, with voters anyway, we'll have to wait and see with their own party, politically acceptable. When Labour did this in 2002, I think, it was the most popular budget they ever did, and they were terrified it would be unpopular. So I suspect with the voters it will be manageable and absolutely necessary. The issue is it's not enough, and where's the rest going to come from?
And very briefly, Julia, there will be a great argument about whether or not there is such a thing as a Brexit dividend. At the end of the day, you heard what Paul Johnson had to say.
Of course there isn't one yet. We haven't left and we're still paying money, and a lot of Leave voters like me will be rather concerned about that £40 billion divorce bill with no strings attached. Well, if we didn't pay that, there would be more cash. But we've got all the uncertainty, none of the upside yet of actually having left. Of course there isn't a Brexit dividend yet. Long term, there will be.